Monday morning in Fortaleza usually brings the heat of the tropical sun and the quiet hum of the financial district waking up. At the Banco Central do Brasil branch on Dom Manuel Avenue, security guards followed their rigid daily protocol. They approached the massive steel doors of the main vault, expecting to find the usual mountains of cash. Instead, they were greeted by a silence that felt heavy and wrong. When the heavy vault doors swung open, the guards froze in absolute disbelief at the sight before them. The floor of the most secure room in northern Brazil had been violated from directly underneath the reinforced concrete. A circular hole, roughly 70 centimeters wide, stood as a dark mouth in the center of the gray floor. Millions of reals had vanished into the earth without a single alarm sounding. The scale of the theft was immediately apparent to the first responders who arrived at the scene shortly after. Empty wooden pallets were scattered across the room where nearly 3.5 tons of currency had once sat. The thieves had targeted 50 real notes, which were unnumbered and nearly impossible to track in the open market. It was a surgical strike against the very heart of the Brazilian economy. News of the breach traveled through the halls of power in Brasilia with the speed of a lightning strike. This was not just a simple bank robbery. It was a direct assault on the national financial system of a major country. The Banco Central was. Investigators from the federal police descended on the vault, their boots echoing on the cold and dusty concrete floor. They peered into the dark hole and realized they were looking at a masterpiece of criminal engineering and patience. A ladder led down into a tunnel that disappeared into the darkness beneath the city streets of Fortaleza. The air coming from the hole smelled of damp earth and professional determination. As the forensic team began their work, the numbers started to paint a picture of a truly historic crime. Over 160 million reals were gone, equivalent to roughly $70 million at the time of the heist. This made it one of the largest bank robberies in human history, executed without firing a single shot. The world was watching a ghost story written in concrete and stolen currency. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no evidence of heavy explosives used to gain entry. The thieves had moved with the quiet efficiency of a professional construction crew working on a high-priority government project. They had bypassed the motion detectors and the heat sensors by staying beneath the floor until the final moment. It was a plan that required months of absolute secrecy and mechanical precision. Outside the bank, the streets of Fortaleza remained oblivious to the chaos unfolding within the reinforced walls of the branch. The thieves had vanished into the urban labyrinth of the city long before the guards had even arrived for work. They had left behind a tunnel that defied logic and a financial hole that would take years to fill. The investigation was now a race against a team that had already won. Detective Enias Sobrera, leading the initial inquiry, noted that the precision of the hole was truly remarkable for any criminal. It looked as if it had been cut by a diamond saw or a highly specialized industrial drilling machine. The thieves knew exactly where to emerge, to avoid the structural beams and the heaviest security sensors in the room. This was the work of a mastermind who understood the building. The media began to call it the heist of the century as details of the underground passage began to leak out. People were fascinated by the audacity of a group that chose to dig their way to fortune rather than use violence. It was a crime that captured the imagination of the public, turning the unknown perpetrators into modern legends. But for the police, it was a humiliation that required an immediate response. Every airport and border crossing in Brazil was placed on high alert as the hunt for the stolen millions began. The authorities knew that moving 3 tons of cash would require a massive logistical operation involving multiple vehicles and safe houses. They searched for any sign of a sudden increase in wealth or suspicious movements of heavy equipment in the area. The trail was cold, but the pressure was rising. The mystery of the hole in Fortaleza was just the beginning of a much larger and darker story. Behind the engineering, marvel lay a network of individuals who had spent months living in the shadows of the city. As the sun set on the first day of the investigation, the scale of the challenge became clear. The hunters were searching for a mastermind who had already vanished into the Brazilian night. To understand the hole in the vault, we must go back to May 2005. A man named Luiz Fernando Ribeiro, known in the underworld as Fernandinho, arrived in Fortaleza. He did not look like a bank robber. He looked like an entrepreneur with a vision for the city. He was the architect of a lie so grand it became invisible to everyone. He rented a modest house at number 1071 on Rua 25 de Março. It was strategically located just 2 blocks away from the Banco Central building. From the outside, it looked like a typical small business in a busy district. A large sign was erected over the entrance that read Grama Sintetica in bold letters. It claimed to sell artificial turf. This was the brilliant stroke of genius that Ribeiro brought to the operation. A landscaping business provided a perfect explanation for everything the neighbors might see. Why were there large vans coming and going at all hours of the day? They were delivering rolls of grass. Why was there so much dirt being moved? They were preparing the soil for installation. Ribeiro was a master of human psychology and social engineering during this phase. He made sure his employees wore matching green uniforms with the company logo. They were polite to the people living on the street, often greeting them with a smile. They even handed out business cards to local residents to reinforce the legitimacy of their fake enterprise. Behind the closed doors of Grama Sintetica, the reality was far more industrial and grim. The front room was a professional office with desks and phones, but the back was a construction site. Ribeiro had recruited experts from across Brazil, including miners and engineers with experience in heavy excavation. They were here to dig a path to a massive fortune. Luiz Fernando Ribeiro was the glue that held this diverse group of criminals together. He provided the initial capital, estimated at nearly $200,000, for equipment and supplies. He managed the payroll and ensured that every man stayed focused on the mission. He was the chief executive officer of a secret and highly illegal underground mining corporation. The digging started in the middle of a bedroom, hidden from any outside view. They used sophisticated tools to break through the initial layers of asphalt and stone beneath the house. Ribeiro insisted on absolute silence during the day to avoid attracting any unwanted attention from the street. The real work happened while the rest of the city slept. One of the greatest challenges of any tunnel is the massive amount of soil removed. Ribeiro solved this by bagging the dirt and stacking it neatly inside the house. When the rooms became full, the vans would transport the bags away under the cover of night. To any observer, it looked like a successful business moving its heavy inventory. Ribeiro did not just want a hole. He wanted a stable and safe corridor. He oversaw the installation of wooden supports and electric lighting throughout the length of the tunnel. He even installed a basic ventilation system using plastic pipes and small fans. This allowed his team to work for hours in the humid heat without suffocating. For 3 months, the facade of Grama Sintetica remained completely flawless. Ribeiro visited the site frequently, checking on the progress and adjusting the timeline. He was a man who understood that patience was more valuable than any weapon. Ribeiro was betting everything on his ability to remain undetected until the very last second. He knew that any mistake, a loud noise, or a suspicious neighbor would end in a prison cell. He maintained a strict code of conduct for his men, forbidding any partying or loud behavior. They were ghosts living in a green-painted shell. As the tunnel approached the 70-meter mark, the tension inside the house reached a breaking point. They were now beneath the heavy traffic of the city, only meters away from the vault. Luiz Fernando Ribeiro watched the progress with the cold eyes of a man who was about to change history. The perfect camouflage was about to pay off. The tunnel was not merely a hole, it was a feat of civil engineering that rivaled professional subway construction projects. Stretching 78 meters from the house to the vault, it ran precisely 4 meters beneath the busy asphalt of Fortaleza. Luiz Fernando Ribeiro had demanded a structure that could withstand the weight of city buses and heavy trucks passing directly overhead. Every meter was a calculated risk against the laws of physics and the eyes of the law. Navigating the subterranean world of a major city required more than just shovels and sweat. It required a map of the invisible. The team had to weave through a chaotic web of ancient sewage pipes, high-voltage electrical cables, and fiber optic lines. One wrong move would have caused a city-wide blackout or a flood that would have buried them alive in seconds. Ribeiro's experts used industrial-grade compasses and laser levels to maintain a perfect trajectory toward the target. Inside the passage, the environment was surprisingly sophisticated for a criminal enterprise. The walls were meticulously lined with high-quality wood paneling to prevent the soft Brazilian soil from collapsing under the intense urban pressure. A string of electric lights illuminated the narrow path, casting long shadows against the damp timber. A network of plastic pipes snaked along the ceiling, pumping fresh air into the depths to keep the workers conscious in the stifling heat. Working in shifts, the specialized crew faced a brutal physical environment that tested their absolute limits. The humidity was nearly 100%, turning the air into a thick, suffocating blanket that made every breath a struggle. They moved like moles, their green uniforms stained with the red clay of Sierra as they clawed closer to the fortune. Ribeiro provided high-energy meals and supplements to ensure his diggers maintained the stamina required for 18-hour shifts in the darkness. The precision of their navigation was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the entire operation for the federal investigators. To hit a specific point on the floor of a vault from 78 meters away is an incredible technical achievement. They had to account for the curve of the earth and the varying density of the soil layers above them. Every centimeter of progress was checked against the master plan that Ribeiro kept locked away in his mind and his documents. By early August, the team reached the final and most formidable obstacle standing between them and the cache. Directly above them lay 1.1 meters of high-density reinforced concrete, laced with heavy steel rebar. This was the floor of the Banco Central vault, designed to be an impenetrable shield against any external force. Conventional drills would have triggered the seismic sensors, alerting the police and the bank security team in a matter of seconds. Ribeiro's team employed a silent and deadly effective method to breach this final barrier without making a sound. They used hydraulic jacks and specialized diamond-tipped cutting tools that operated with a low-frequency hum. They moved slowly, taking hours to penetrate just a few inches of the gray stone to avoid generating heat or vibrations. It was a surgical procedure performed on the very foundation of the Brazilian financial system while the city moved above them. As the sun set on Friday, August 5th, the first tiny crack appeared in the concrete floor of the vault. The team stopped and listened for any sign of an alarm or the heavy boots of guards coming to investigate. Silence reigned in the basement of the bank, confirming that their bypass techniques had worked perfectly once again. They were no longer just diggers. They were the owners of a secret door into the heart of the nation. Ribeiro stood at the entrance of the tunnel back at Grama Sintética, watching his men prepare for the final phase. The air was thick with anticipation and the metallic scent of industrial machinery. He knew that the next 48 hours would determine their fate and define their names in the annals of crime. The tunnel was a masterpiece of patience and technical skill, a bridge between a rented house and a life of unimaginable luxury. The final piece of concrete was carefully lowered down into the tunnel, leaving a perfect circular opening in the vault floor. For the first time, the cool, air-conditioned air of the bank drifted down into the humid and dirty passage. It was the scent of success, the crisp smell of millions of unnumbered banknotes waiting to be taken. Luiz Fernando Ribeiro gave the signal, and the human conveyor belt began its historic and silent operation. The breakthrough into the vault was just the beginning of a grueling physical marathon for the team hidden below. They looked up from the dark hole and saw stacks of cash taller than a grown man in the moonlight. The air inside the vault was dry and smelled of old paper and ink, a sharp contrast to the tunnel. Luiz Fernando Ribeiro checked his watch, knowing every second was a gamble against the Monday morning opening. Moving 3.5 tons of paper is not a task for the weak or the disorganized individuals. Ribeiro had designed a human conveyor belt, a line of men stretching from the vault floor back to the house. Each man was a gear in a silent, high-speed machine designed to drain the bank of its vital blood. They passed heavy bags of 50 real notes down into the dark, narrow passage with rhythmic precision. The physical strain on the men was immense, as the hours turned into a blur of red dust and bills. Sweat poured off their bodies, mixing with the clay of the tunnel to form a thick, slippery mud on the floor. Their muscles burned from the repetitive motion of lifting and passing the massive weight of the currency all night. Yet, the sight of the fortune kept them moving through the suffocating heat of the underground passage. Ribeiro stood at the house end of the tunnel, acting as the primary dispatcher for the massive cargo arriving safely. He directed the loading of several vehicles hidden inside the garage of Grama Sintética, ensuring each was perfectly balanced. He knew that an overloaded van would attract the unwanted attention of traffic police on the highways leading out. He managed the chaos with the cold and calculated focus of a seasoned military general in battle. The team specifically targeted the 50 real notes because they were unnumbered and circulated widely in the local Brazilian economy. This choice was a strategic masterstroke by Ribeiro to ensure the money remained untraceable once it entered the market. By avoiding the newer, sequential bills, they effectively blinded the federal investigators before the chase even began. They were stealing ghosts that would eventually vanish into a million different pockets across Brazil. Throughout the weekend, the fake landscaping business remained the perfect shield for the massive movement of the stolen wealth. Neighbors saw the same green vans coming and going, assuming the business was thriving with new weekend landscaping contracts. No one suspected that behind the tinted glass, millions of reals were being stacked like bricks in a wall. The camouflage held firm while the bank was slowly hollowed out from the dark inside. As the sun began to rise on Sunday, the fatigue started to take a dangerous toll on the tired workers. One man nearly fainted from the lack of oxygen in the deep sections of the tunnel where the fans struggled. Ribeiro forced them to take short breaks, offering water and encouragement to keep the momentum going forward toward victory. They could not afford to leave a single bag behind after months of such hard and dangerous labor. The final bags were moved out of the vault by Sunday afternoon, leaving the room strangely hollow and very silent. The team began the process of cleaning the tunnel of any personal items that could link them to the crime. They left behind a few tools and the wooden supports, but they took their DNA and their fingerprints. The heist was almost complete, and the window of opportunity for a clean escape was closing fast. Ribeiro gave the order to abandon the house and the tunnel forever, as the sun dipped below the horizon. The vehicles were loaded, the men were exhausted, and the fortune was ready to be dispersed across the entire country. They drove away in small groups to avoid creating a suspicious convoy on the roads leading out of Fortaleza. The master of the tunnel was now a man of the open highway and shadows. By the time the first light of Monday touched the sign of Grama Sintética, the house was an empty shell. The tunnel remained a silent monument to their ambition, hidden beneath the unaware feet of the many morning commuters. Luiz Fernando Ribeiro was already miles away, calculating the next phase of his grand design for the money. He had pulled off the impossible, but the real danger for him was only just starting. The discovery of the empty vault on Monday morning sent a massive shockwave through the entire Brazilian government. Federal agents flooded the streets of Fortaleza, tracing every lead from the house on Rua 25 de Marco. They found the tunnel, a silent testament to the technical genius that had bypassed their most expensive sensors. The hunt for the mastermind known as Fernandinho was officially the highest priority in South America. Luiz Fernando Ribeiro was now the most wanted man in the country, but he was also the wealthiest. He had escaped with a significant portion of the loot, attempting to disappear into the vast interior of Brazil. However, 3 tons of cash is a heavy burden that leaves a visible trail of greed and suspicion. Even with his brilliance, Ribeiro could not hide the sudden influx of wealth from the local underworld. The tragedy of the Banco Central heist was that the mastermind survived his crime but not his peers. In October 2005, only 2 months after the heist, Ribeiro was kidnapped from a nightclub in the city of São Paulo. His captors were not ordinary thugs, but a group of corrupt individuals who knew exactly how much he was worth. They demanded a massive ransom of $5 million for his life. Ribeiro's family paid the ransom, hoping for his safe return to the shadows where he once operated so effectively. But in the world of high-stakes crime, there is rarely any honor among those who live by the sword. His body was discovered on a lonely rural road outside of Rio de Janeiro with multiple gunshot wounds. The man who had outsmarted the central bank had been outplayed by the simplest form of human betrayal. The death of the mastermind did not stop the relentless march of the federal police across the vast Brazilian landscape. Over the next few years, they arrested more than 30 people connected to the Grama Sintética operation and the tunnel. They recovered nearly 20 million reals, but this was only a small fraction of the total amount stolen. The rest of the fortune vanished into a labyrinth of front companies and offshore accounts. The Banco Central heist forced a total revolution in the way Brazilian financial institutions protected their physical and digital assets. New regulations were implemented to monitor large cash transactions and the transport of heavy currency across state lines. banks began installing seismic sensors that reached deep into the bedrock to detect any subterranean movement. The hole in Fortaleza became a textbook example for security experts on how to prevent the next great engineering theft. Today, the house on Rua 25 de Marco is a quiet reminder of a time when a landscaper was a king. The tunnel has been filled with concrete, sealing the path that Luis Fernando Ribeiro used to reach for the stars. His name remains a legend in the favelas and the boardrooms, representing the ultimate peak of criminal ambition. He proved that even the strongest fortress has a floor that can be broken by a determined mind. As we look back at the events of 2005, we see a story of incredible brilliance and ultimate human tragedy. Ribeiro was a man who saw a hole in the system and decided to crawl through it toward glory. He achieved the impossible, only to find that the weight of the money was more dangerous than any bank vault. The ghosts of the Banco Central heist still haunt the streets of Fortaleza, whispering about the missing millions. In the end, the story of Luis Fernando Ribeiro is a cautionary tale about the high cost of a perfect crime. He was an architect, a leader, and a ghost who built a bridge to a fortune beneath the earth. But the world above eventually caught up with him, reminding us that every tunnel has two ends. The mastermind is gone, but the legend of the artificial turf company lives on in history books forever. The final balance sheet of the heist remains a mystery that continues to fascinate the public and the police today. Millions of reals are still circulating in the economy, untraced and forgotten by the system that once owned them. Every time a new tunnel is discovered or a bank is threatened, the name of Ribeiro is mentioned again. He left a legacy of fear and admiration that will never truly be buried in the red soil.